Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first of our set of webinars for 2024. This one is on frameworks and dynamic purchasing systems. My name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of 3 co-founders of Go for Growth, and I will be your main host for this morning's event. We'll just wait a few seconds just as people are joining. I can see lots of people coming on to the webinar as we speak. So we'll just give it a couple of seconds and then we'll crack on. And I think, although it's the 9th of January, it's 9th of January, isn't it? I think it's still okay to say Happy New Year. So Happy New Year, everybody. I'm sure something happens after the 9th of January when it's not okay to say anymore. But Happy New Year. We hope that everybody that's joined us has had a lovely festive break and an easy start to 2024. So let's get going. Okay. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping first. So firstly, welcome to everybody that's joined us. We are talking about frameworks and dynamic purchasing systems today. As I said, I'm Gillian Askew. I will be your host for today. And I'm delighted to be joined by 2 of my colleagues, Lauren from Go for Growth and also Sarah from YPO. Welcome, both of you. We'll do a couple of introductions to everybody when we've just gone through housekeeping. So just to let you know, the session is being recorded today. The recording, along with a copy of the slide deck, will be sent out to all registered attendees, and that's usually within 48 hours of the session. We do have time for Q&A set aside at the end, but do feel free to put any questions that you've got throughout the session into the Q&A function. Lauren will be keeping an eye on both chat and Q&A throughout the session. And if there's any questions that are relevant to the slide that we're talking about, we will try and answer those questions as we go along. In the unlikely event, however, that either Sarah or Lauren or I talk too much and we do run out of time for questions, if there are any questions in the Q&A that we haven't been able to answer, we will answer them after the event and we'll send those answers out along with the slide deck. So any questions that you have, do feel free to pop them in that Q&A. There is a chat function, as always, on Zoom. So if you want to say hi and introduce yourself, please do feel free to do so in the chat function. If you just double check that it's set to who you want to see, whatever you're chatting about, whether that's hosts and panelists or everyone, please do feel free to chat as you go through. You can see on the screen what we're covering in the session today. So a number of things about frameworks and DPSs. We're going to look at how they stand under the current regulations, which is the Public Contracting Regulations of 2015. So PCR 2015 is usually what it's referred to. And then we've got a brief look at how those things will change under the Procurement Act of 2023 when that comes into force in October this year. We'll chat through the benefits of frameworks and DPSs as they stand at the minute for businesses and especially for smaller organisations or voluntary sector organisations. And then we'll give an overview, Sarah will give an overview from YPO's perspective on what help and support is available to access frameworks and dynamic purchasing systems that YPO are letting, and Go for Growth will have a run through what help and support is available through Go for Growth as well. And then we'll take some time for questions and discussion at the end. So that's what we're going to cover today. As I said, my name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of 3 co-founders of an organisation called Go for Growth, who are partnering with YPO. Our job is to try and support the marketplace to find and secure opportunities in the public sector, but also in the private sector as well. Lauren, can I ask you to do a brief introduction, please?
Absolutely. So I'm Lauren from Go for Growth. I will be, as Gillian said previously, I'll be manning the Q&A today. I'll also be sending the follow-up email on the back of today's session. So if you do have any questions that you can't think of during today's webinar, do reply to the email that we do send out and I'll be able to pass those on to either Jill or Sarah, and we'll come back to you in later time.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lauren. And Sarah, would you do an introduction for us?
Hi, thanks, Jill. Good morning, everyone. Sarah Sessum, Strategic Procurement Manager at YPO for the Place category.
Thank you. Right, so frameworks. We're going to try and cover 4 main things. We are talking at quite high level today. So as Lauren says, if there are further detailed questions or if you want to have a further conversation, please do get in touch with any of us afterwards. But we're going to try and cover a basic overview of what frameworks are, how they work, why they're used and by who, and then those award mechanisms that are typically in place that sees work come through a framework in the end. But if we start with a bit of a definition, what is a framework? Basically, it's a pre-arranged contract with suppliers that is set up typically by public sector organisations for the purpose of streamlining procurement by agreeing on terms and prices for goods and services in advance. And a framework will be set up by one organisation but used by many organisations. And I'll talk a little bit about what an in-scope organisation is in a second. Frameworks are typically for common goods and services, but they are often used for more complex requirements as well. And effectively what they do is they comprise of a list of suppliers with standardised contract terms. Frameworks can often be divided up by lots, and that might be lots by product or by service, and often lots can be set up for region or geographical level as well. And when a public sector organisation, a contracting authority, then needs a service or a product, they would typically call off from a framework, often through something called a mini competition or a further competition amongst framework suppliers. And we'll talk a little bit more about those award mechanisms shortly. So for public sector contracting authorities, and that includes schools in scope, and it can often include third sector organisations as well. Using a framework generally ensures that the buying process is fully compliant to the UK prevailing legislation. And what that means in a practical sense is that all the suppliers that are listed on that framework have been assessed during the framework procurement process for the usual stuff that you'd be tested on in a contract, like your financial stability, your track record, your experience, and your professional capability. And so therefore, a framework for a public sector organisation using it constitutes less risk for public sector buyers, and it can often present a lighter touch way of securing the right supplier. So in public sector, often resources are under pressure, they're stretched. And so using a framework can offer both a value for money and an easier and compliant route to supply for a public sector buyer. So how do they get set up? So typically what happens in a framework is a public sector organisation, and often they're used by public sector buying organisations, of which YPO is one, but it's not limited to a public sector buying organisation, and the abbreviation is PSBO. So if I use that, that's what I mean. Any organisation actually can set up a framework, but often they're used by public sector buying organisations. But a public sector organisation, whoever it is, will issue a tender for a particular category or of services or goods, and suppliers will bid to be included in that framework. And then successful bidders are then listed as approved suppliers for a fixed period. And frameworks, as they stand at the minute under PCR, are permissible up to 4 years in duration. So you'll often find that a framework will last for around 4 years, and that's usually inclusive of any extension. So what you might see is a 2-year contract period plus one, so 2 extension periods to take it to the full 4-year period. So there is a framework can be really great, and we'll talk about the benefits of them. But as with everything, there is a little bit of a health warning in that they are non-exclusive in nature. And what I mean by that is being on a framework itself doesn't guarantee work, but it does give an opportunity to compete in often a much then smaller marketplace for the goods and services that the framework scope is covering. So you're not competing against everybody at that competition stage, you're then only competing against the other providers who have also been listed on the framework, which can often be a smaller marketplace. And as I said, there are effectively 2 main award mechanisms that are used in frameworks. So the most common, and Sarah, I think I'm right in saying the most common mechanism for awarding work is through a mini competition. You would either hear it called a mini competition or a further competition, something like that. And effectively what that means is a qualifying organisation. And a qualifying organisation is somebody who the framework has said can use that framework once it's set up. So that might be any public sector organisation, or it could be any NHS trust, or it could be a list of local authorities, or it could include third sector organisations, for example. But in the framework, before you bid it, the framework will make it clear what the scope of use is for that framework. So you will be able to see as a bidder what the potential for business could be and what the geographical spread of that business could be. And that can be really important depending on what you do as an organisation, to figure out where the business could come from and how you might service that requirement should you be awarded the work through a mini competition. But effectively, any qualifying organisation based on that scope can then run a mini competition to suppliers who have been awarded to the framework or through a specific lot, for example. And that contracting authority can then look for their specific needs to find the right supplier from the framework. And in any contract, there are weightings. So if you've been through public sector work before, what you'll see in any invitation to tender is that the score of 100% is broken down into sections of what's important. So you might have, say, 40% weighting to quality, 40% weighting to price, and 20% weighting to social value. And that's at framework level. When the mini competition is then run, the contracting authority who's running that mini competition might want to deviate slightly from those award criteria, but that will be laid out in terms of tolerances in the framework. So the art of the possible, you would know upfront, basically. So your 20% social value couldn't drop down to 0, or potentially it couldn't go up to 100%. Is that right, Sarah? Have I explained that in the right way?
Yeah, that's correct. So it will outline it usually within the documents, and I'm obviously talking from a public buying organisation perspective, but the same would apply. It would outline it, and there would be a difference, usually 10-20%. The customer can be radical, and they can, they can choose to do their own. The risk is definitely on them, because if they look to really alter it, obviously that can have implications for the agreement. But it tends to be the research has been done, so we know kind of what the market would look and what would be the dominating factor, and in what way they would determine to be the highest weighted criteria. And that gives you a really good example, an insight into what they're looking for. If quality is extremely high, or if your customer service is higher and they've amended the weightings, you can see the direction of importance that customer is putting on the requirements as well. So it gives you a lot more insight into it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Sarah. So that's how a mini competition would work. The other award mechanism is direct award. And that does effectively what it says on the tin. So when no further competition is required, a supplier can effectively be directly awarded to by a contracting authority under the terms of the framework. And the framework agreement itself, when you're bidding it, will make it clear if direct award is an option and under what terms. And Sarah and I were chatting earlier, you can have frameworks where direct award and mini competitions are both at play. And the terms under which they are able to be used will be fully transparent in the framework before you bid it. So what you shouldn't have in a framework is any lack of insight or foresight of how work would be able to be awarded to you once you are successfully appointed to a framework. Cool. Fabulous. Before we move on to dynamic purchasing systems, Lauren, is there anything in the Q&A that we need to cover?
No, not at the minute.
Not at the minute. Sarah, anything you wanted to add on frameworks before we move on?
I think you've covered everything. I think in terms of direct award, I think it's usually used where it's quite easy to set a price or a quality or an expectation of what it is that's been purchased, because according to the regulations, you do have to determine kind of who's going to win which proportion of business through a framework. So usually there will be criteria, things like ranking or re-establishing criteria. But rather than go into that detail now, if anybody wants some more detail outside of that, we can do it. But it's quite clear and easy, and there'll be an expectation of setting some kind of pricing and fixing it usually as well if there's going to be a direct award. So sometimes it is a lot easier, and the risk isn't there. You know, if you're looking to do a further competition, you're recompeting it and you're having the opportunity to go back out and evaluate against exactly what it is the customer's looking for, rather than just going in direct awarding, which it just depends on the customer. And you'll know this more than us, that the customer will drive this behaviour and what they're looking to do. That's made it any clearer. I don't know if it has, sorry. But
they are big and complicated things, aren't they?
I know.
Lauren, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, we've had a question come in now. So it's the question is, so regarding the NHS frameworks, is it possible to enter the framework after 2 years before extension takes place? So
and shout if I'm wrong on this, Sarah, but no, not at the minute. Once the framework has been competed and you're on it, you're either locked in or locked out, is my understanding of the framework. Is that right,
yes,
Sarah?
until everything changes shortly. Yes, that is the case. If it's a framework, then yes. DPS, obviously, we're going to touch on, but that would be open. But we'd need to know the specifics around it. So if you've got a specific framework that you're looking at, we can have a look at that. But yeah.
Okay. But typically, Sarah, I think there might be a bit of static on your line a little.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Cool. So typically, though, under PCR 15, once a framework is let, it doesn't reopen. So even at that extension point, a new supplier wouldn't typically be able to join that framework, which sort of segues us quite nicely into dynamic purchasing systems. So we're going to cover pretty much the same. So what are they? How do they work? We'll think about why they're different from frameworks. And also we're going to cover just some little bit of information around advertising DPSs, because it's quite different to advertising other opportunities. So again, let's start with the definition. What is it? So a dynamic purchasing system, you'll often hear it being abbreviated to DPS. So if people are talking to you about a DPS, what they mean is a dynamic purchasing system. They are effectively a type of electronic procurement tool, and they're used for commonly purchased goods and services only at this point. And unlike a framework, DPSs are open throughout their lifetime for new suppliers to join. So in that example in the NHS, if it were a dynamic purchasing system and not a framework, the answer to that question would have been yes, you can join, and not just at the 2-year point. Effectively, you can join at any point. They're open for their entire lifetime. What I will say is contracting authorities, although they are open, you can submit your application to join at any time. Often contracting authorities will evaluate periodically, so they'll evaluate every so often. That might be quarterly, monthly. Some will evaluate as bid submissions come in, but and again, it will be clear in the documentation when that evaluation will take place. But typically, a DPS is open throughout its entire life. Some of the key characteristics of how DPSs work. It is a more flexible route to procurement compared to traditional procurement methods, because it allows for new suppliers to join at any time during its lifespan. Currently, as I said, it's only used for common goods and services, so usually commodity type contracts only. And like a lot of procurement processes now, the entire process from application to tender submission is managed electronically, which is designed to streamline that whole procurement process. In a DPS, pricing is often not tested until call-off stage, and direct award is not permitted through a DPS, so it is run via a mini competition. So you'll always be competing for work, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the benefits, because there's some quite important benefits of how that knits together in a DPS. And unlike a framework, which are capped at 4 years at the minute under PCR 2015, there's no limit or cap on the term of a DPS. So what you might see is a dynamic purchasing system that is open for effectively 10 years, 8 years, something like that. And it's open for that entire time for anyone to join, right up until the last available moment of that DPS. There is a bit of a health warning on DPSs in terms of advertising. So all of the procurement portals and the search engines, so that includes Contracts Finder and Finder Tender Service, have an alert system. embedded in them. So effectively, you can key in the codes that are most relevant to the goods and services that you sell, and you can get an automatic alert when an opportunity that matches what you're looking for comes up, and it will be emailed to you. However, with a DPS, because they're open for such a long time, they're only actually advertised when they first go live. And so that alert service won't necessarily see a 5-year-old DPS and recognise it as an opportunity and tell you about it 5 years into it, 2 years into it, or even 8 years into it. So that doesn't mean that they're not there on the portals, and it's not that they're not being advertised. It's just that the alert service probably won't pick up on it. And so in order to find DPSs outside of that very first time that they're launched, it's best to do a manual look through the opportunities that are available. So whether you're doing that through a portal or Contracts Finder or Find a Tender service, if you do a manual search, then those manual searches will bring up DPSs as well as they will bring up any of the other frameworks or regular contracting opportunities. So our advice is always don't rely on the alert service anyway. Do a regular manual search at whatever frequency suits your business, because it's often better to do that. There are some stories of the alert service telling you about the most perfect opportunity a day before it closes, or telling you about an opportunity that has absolutely no relevance a month in advance. So they're okay, the alert services, but it's not something certainly that we would advise that you wholly and solely rely on for finding opportunities. Lauren, I think we've got a question, have we, or something in the chat?
Yeah, so does periodic evaluation mean periodic removal of suppliers?
No, it doesn't. In the new regulations, suppliers will be able to be removed, but they can't under the current regulations. So you can opt to come out, is my understanding, but you can't be removed from that. So no, that periodic evaluation is for new entrants. And the way that work is awarded is through that mini competition. So what you will find with a DPS, and we'll talk about it in the benefits, is that there's often a simpler way of joining a DPS. And over the life of 10 years, the contracting opportunity might be 1 or 2 years in length. It won't necessarily be 10 years in length. And so you'll be bidding for that work as it comes out. And that's what will be evaluated from a mini competition. And then you'll have that one evaluation to join the DPS at the front end. Hopefully that answers the question. Anything else from either you or Lauren before we move on?
No, from me.
No. Oh, good. Okay. So why are these things any good to anybody? The benefits are plentiful. They're on screen. So if we think about frameworks first, they do open doors to larger scale public sector contracts that might otherwise have been challenging to access. And that's not to say that getting onto a framework is the most simple process, but it is often a more simplified process. And you do it once for a longer term. And so it can be a good way of accessing larger contracts. Now, with the health warning in mind that I said before, in terms of there is no guarantee of work through a framework. That said, if there is work coming through a framework, it can often be helpful in terms of that ability to assist in resource management, financial forecasting, and giving some predictability and stability. What you might find in a framework is, here's what the activity has looked like previously. So whilst we can't guarantee that that would continue in the future, this is how busy the framework was before. And it will give you some sense of what you might be able to expect through a framework. Again, with the caveat of that not being guaranteed. However, one of the big benefits of being on a framework is enhancing a business's reputation. It really showcases your capability to meet public sector standards. What you have been, of course, when you join a framework is assessed in the way that I described previously. And so even joining a framework, even before any work comes through it, marketing that can be really useful to any business to showcase that you have all of the things that you need to be able to successfully join a public sector framework. And that track record is really useful. You know, successfully delivering under a framework can really help to open more doors to opportunities, not just within the public sector, but also outside of the public sector. It is a really good construct to help build reputation and showcase that you have this track record. And because it typically involves mini competitions, it doesn't necessarily just save administrative time for the contracting authority. That mini competition is often a streamlined bidding process for you to actually access the work, and is a smaller, shorter process than going through a big contracting process for each opportunity. And that can lead to quicker contract awards and less administrative overhead, especially for smaller businesses where resources are a bit more constrained. So there are definitely benefits to being on, to being on a framework. In terms of a DPS, the clear standout benefit of a DPS is that continuous entry for providers. And that's super helpful for the public sector, where buying local is really important. And being able to encourage suppliers to join a DPS so that there is a compliant mechanism of being able to run a competition that includes suppliers that are local is brilliant. And as for smaller businesses especially, it can often be a much easier route to entry into the public sector. And what it does is actually, because it's always open, it allows businesses to apply when you feel ready and most prepared, rather than being restricted by fixed tendering timelines. With a framework, it's launched, it's advertised, you have X amount of days to return your bid submission, and you're either successful or unsuccessful. With a DPS, you can decide to bid for when you're ready, when you feel most prepared for it. And if you're unsuccessful, you will be able to try again. So it has a much more open front end in that respect.
I just jump in there, Jill, as well.
Sure.
So if you are unsuccessful on DPS, a framework as well, but more importantly for a DPS, you will be told why, and you will be given details of where you've been unsuccessful, and this is obviously an opportunity for you to work with Jill and her team at Go for Growth, or I'll speak to the framework, the DPS provider, because they should be telling you some things. It can be really small things where when a selection criteria may have answered incorrectly, or it may be some of the evidence that you provided isn't quite there, but having that detail means you can reapply straight away. I think there's 30 days that you've the time scale, but you should get that information back, and if you're not, then you can ask for that information as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can see we've got a question in, Lauren. Sorry. Yeah,
we do. So is joining a framework in PSBO a strictly regulated process, or is it relatively easy to join for an SME but difficult to win tenders once in the framework?
do you want to take it, Sarah?
Right, that one. So a framework, because it's evaluating a lot more. So a framework is setting in place a lot more. So you're evaluating a lot more quality. You don't evaluate quality or price within a DPS, but you do within a framework agreement. So it's a lot more complicated, but certainly not restrictive. I mean, for YPO, for example, our buildings category has over 80% SMEs across the board. Obviously, some are larger, some are micro. A DPS is much more easier to join. And obviously, as we've discussed, it is open. However, because you're only running a mini competition, you have to re-establish everything else then that the customer, the contracting authority is looking for. So there's a lot more work that would go up front within a framework agreement, but what it would mean is there would be opportunity for direct award if that was applicable, or a much more scaled down competition because a lot of the work's already been done. So I guess it's kind of benefits and disadvantages of both. You probably would have to commit a lot more to get onto a framework, but again, every single framework is different. In terms of the work, there is no guarantee on either. However, you would be able to ask the question of whoever it is putting the DPS or framework in place, about kind of what work, as Jill had described before, what work's gone before. If you are bidding for a public sector buying organisation, for example, you could look at the spend that's gone through them, their ownership model, who currently buys through them. And you probably would, you know, if you're working with a contracting authority or you know, public sector customer, you would have an idea of the kind of route to market they currently use as well. So if they use frameworks, or if they go to market themselves, or if they do use a DPS, they may be able to guide you into what they're looking to use if they're wanting you to be a potential bidder for anything they're going out for. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Thank you. And if not, we're both available.
Yeah.
All of us are available afterwards. So if there's more detail that you need, please do get in touch. Moving on to the Procurement Act 2023. So the first thing to say is what we're talking through today, it covers England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Scotland is slightly different, and we'll put some information out that's dedicated to how Scotland will work through procurement reform. So what we're talking about today is England, Northern Ireland and Wales. We do have a much more detailed webinar on the 23rd of January, also supported by YPO, where we delve into more detail on the Procurement Act. So what we're covering in these next couple of minutes is super high level. But just to give you a flavour of, in terms of frameworks and DPSs, what this will look like. So some main changes of the Procurement Act 2023 that will come into force in October 2024. Effectively, it's trying to simplify the procedures. So the Act is aiming to streamline procedures and processes, reduce complexity and reduce bureaucracy, but also increase transparency. So there's a real emphasis on transparency in procurement decisions, and that's really to support the fostering of fair competition. There will be a value for money focus, a much bigger focus on value for money. So the Act is encouraging procurement that considers quality and innovation and not just lower cost. And there will be also enhanced supplier engagement. So the Act proposes to enhance engagement with suppliers, including SMEs, before and during the procurement process. And what that really means is that the changes are expected to open more opportunities, especially for small to medium enterprises and diverse suppliers, including small, micro, startup businesses and smaller sized voluntary sector organisations as well. And that will allow for more flexibility. So there is something called the flexible procurement, which will allow procurement buyers to adapt their process to really focus on what they're trying to achieve, the outcomes, right, rather than trying to shoehorn outcomes into a restricted process. And there will be an emphasis on social value. I mean, the Public Services Act of 2012 was assented actually early 2013. So it's not new news. It's been around for 10 years or more. But there is a real focus. So you will see procurements that are really encouraging social value, sustainable, environmental sustainability and social impact throughout. And we do expect weightings and scoring to go up in that way. What does it do to what we've talked about today? So the Procurement Act evolves dynamic purchasing systems, DPSs, to dynamic markets. Now, what I do want to tell everybody is the public contract regs, so PCR 2015, will continue until October. And so anything that is set up before October will be governed for its life by the contracting regs that we've got in place now. So a DPS or a framework that's let before October will continue. So a DPS could be let in August, for example, unless anything changes. It could be let for 10 years and it will stay governed by PCR 15 for the life that it's out. At the same time as that happens, from October, any new requirements will be done under the Procurement Act 2023. So it wouldn't be a DPS from October for a new requirement, that would be under a dynamic market. And actually it behaves quite similar in lots of ways. So it's always open. It's got open advertising of opportunities. So hopefully this issue of not seeing it on the alert services will reduce or even go away. And suppliers should be able to see dynamic markets in order to be able to bid for specific opportunities right the way through its life. It's also expanding what it can be used for. So a DPS is for common goods and services, commodity type stuff at the minute, but it will be used for anything going forward. So that is goods, services and works going forward. As there is now, there's no time cap for a dynamic market, and there's no limit to the amount of suppliers or VCSEs that can be on there. So there's no maximum term on a dynamic market like there is in frameworks. And frameworks will change quite significantly. So the framework at the minute has a cap of 4 years. A framework under the new regulations will be permissible for up to 8 years, provided that they are reopened for competition periodically. And my understanding is, and I'm going to look to Sarah to nod or shake her head, if it's open for 8 years, there would be specific intervals of years 3 and 5 to reopen it. And that marks a significant extension from the current maximum duration for a closed framework, but it also means that that framework is no longer closed. So the period that it is closed for is shorter. So, and new entrants, so that question on an NHS framework, after October, if that framework was open for 4 years, 5 years, it would have to have 1 reopen point in it. And if it's open for 8 years, it would have to have 2 reopening points. And when it reopens, it's not just for new bidders. It is for existing suppliers on the framework to reoffer if they want to. So you don't have to, is my understanding, but you can change your offer, add new services. You can also affect your pricing. So at that reopen point, it reopens to everybody, not just new entrants, is my understanding. Sarah, did I get that right?
You did, yes, perfectly. The only thing to add on the 8-year framework is there will be no direct awards. It would be kind of like a DPS, the fact it's open. And what that allows then is that a framework provider couldn't onboard a supplier for the opportunity to direct award it for a customer. It means everybody has the ability to bid for anything that comes through it, which is a good good position to be in.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. That's a great point. And so we've got just about 5 minutes left. So we're going to whistle stop through the rest of these slides and then we'll open for questions. So Sarah, can you give us a really brief overview of YPO, how you go to market and how suppliers might get onto a YPO framework or DPS?
Yes, no, I talk really quick. That's fine. So YPO owned by an organisation, owned by 13 local authorities. We've been going 50 years this year. We turn over $1 billion now. We have routes to market for everything and anything you could look for. I predominantly work with local authorities because of our ownership model, but we all public sector users. We have over 120 frameworks and DPSs, and we also collaborate with other organisations, CCS, Crown Commercial Services, you will have heard of, who are mainly central government only, ESPO, who are Eastern Shires. What I would suggest is reach out to me, or if you look on our website, we have a page dedicated to suppliers. You are able to book time with our buyers as well. We've got a 50-strong team for our contractual frameworks and for our products through our warehouses, which we also put frameworks in place for supply. We also have a team of about 50 in that as well. So if you do want to speak to us, our website and the details will be following this, but we do have a page. We have a e-procurement system, which is Pro Contracts. You've probably heard of it, and all of our opportunities are advertised on there, but it's the best point of contact is the website, or if you want to reach out to me. Is that quick enough?
Brilliant. No, it's great. And when Sarah and I were chatting about the webinar, there are lots of smaller organisations on YPO frameworks and DPSs. So the big thing, and it's the same for any of the public sector buying organisations, but for purposes of today, YPO have got a real focus on developing accessibility. They're really open for business to everybody. So the message is, please don't feel that it's too complicated or it's too difficult. If you have a product or service that matches what YPO are putting out there, whether that's a framework or a DPS, please do get in touch. And YPO and Go for Growth work in partnership. So we can support you and YPO can also support you. So it's definitely an open door for business. Please do come and have a chat. And on that, in terms of Go for Growth, we've got lots of support that's available. So, and we're process only. So what you'll know in the public sector is in a live competition, at some point, the contracting authority, to be fair and to be to manage the regulatory environment, there's only so much support that they can give in a live competition, and you can ask questions through clarifications as usual, but Go for Growth can be your process support partner, and I emphasize that it's process. We can't help you with pricing, we can't help you with technical stuff, but we can help you with process right the way throughout. We're a partner to IPO, but we're independent of them as well. So we can help you with getting ready for bidding those opportunities, whether that's in YPO or anywhere else, and covering everything from social value to finding the opportunity in the first place and how to use the portal. Lauren is the world's best at running portals. If Lauren doesn't know how to navigate the portal, it probably doesn't exist. And I've probably set you up there, love, so sorry about that. But if you've got any portal questions at all or need support, do go to Lauren for that. She can definitely help you. We have online courses, we've got a self-service platform, and Go for Growth offers the public sector supply ready status, which is an accreditation that you can get. It's free of charge to get, that actually shows your potential customers that you have invested in your skill set and you are ready to do business. That will be CPD accredited by March this year. So in going through the public sector supply ready accreditation, you will also get continued professional development hours, which will also help with social value stuff as well. But lots of support, and everything that we do is offered free of charge to providers. Oh, that was a bit fancy. I didn't know it was going to do that. Who knew? So this is the PSSR. Effectively, it helps you understand the basics in any public procurement process, and it will guide you through things like the standard selection questionnaire as it stands at the minute under PCR 15. Lots of embedded support in there, lots of resources, and it's a really good way of standing out, if you like, in a crowded market to show that your customer that you are ready to do business with. And so the big message before we take some questions is you're not alone. There's lots of help from YPO, but also from Go for Growth. We'll put the YPO website details on the slide deck when it comes out as well. You'll get a copy of all of these things, so please do just get in touch. You can chat to us through the phone. You can book a Teams session. As Sarah said, they've got 50 strong buyers all ready and waiting to talk to you. So if you want to have a chat, we are all ears. Thank you for listening to us. We have a few minutes left for questions. So if anybody has a question that they would like to ask, please do feel free to do so now. If you'd rather not, or as it always happens to me, the minute I leave a webinar, I think, there were those things that I wanted to know and I've not asked. As Lauren said at the beginning, if you do remember or you'd rather ask in private, do just fire an email over and we'll answer those questions outside of the session. Give it a second and we'll have a few minutes of staring at each other just to see if anybody does want to ask a question. Lauren, Sarah, anything that either of you want to add before we close?
I'm just going to bob in the link to the suppliers landing page. If anybody does want to look on YPO, then it's a lot easier than trying to find it sometimes. But yeah, please honestly reach out. That we, as Jill said, all of our buyers and our category managers spend quite a lot of time working with SMEs, and that sort of shows because we do have a good proportion. I mean, our ICT category has over 75% SMEs, and 40% of them are already getting spent through the frameworks and DPSs that we've got in place. Our FM and buildings categories are even higher. So please do reach out. We're always looking. We always say our agreements are only as good as the suppliers that are on there. So.
And there is a point, I know we've said the health warning about there's no guarantee of work on any of these things, but there is no contracting authority that wants to set up a framework with loads of suppliers on that aren't getting business. It is a mechanism for measurement of the success of the framework or DPS. So it is scrutinised. So whilst there is no guarantee, and we should all know that and have our eyes wide open, there also should be focus and measurement by whoever has let the framework or DPS about what kind of work is going through and which suppliers are getting it, and that's part of the success criteria. So please don't think you shouldn't go there because there's no guarantee of work. Cool. Thank you, everybody. It is 10:44, so we are right on time. Thank you, everyone, for carving out some time from what I know are super busy calendars. Even this early in the year, it's all gone a bit crazy. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us. Thank you, Lauren, for manning the Q&A for us. And we'll get all of the documents sent out to you in the next 48 hours.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.